everyone. Thanks so much, Amanda, for the video. Hey, David. So before I jump in, I'm just going to, so my name's Annie, and I'm with GVI and Bushwise. I'll be hosting today, and Dr. David Mills will be my guest. Just before we get going on our chat, just a little housekeeping. We have a Q&A feature in this webinar. So if you have any questions for the guests here or for the attendees here, please throw your questions in there and we'll do our best to get through them as the webinar goes on. And then we will send a recording of this video to everybody at the end in case they want to look back on it or if they have internet issues, because I know we often do. That'll be recorded and sent out to everyone who signed up. Okay, David, good to see you.
Yeah, how are you?
I'm doing well. It's a bit of a windy day here in Durban. How's it going in Cape Town?
Very windy here as well.
Yeah, it's that time of year. Huh? Nice.
It is.
Awesome. Well, I think let's just dive right into it. Tell us who you are and what you do.
Okay. So as Annie said, I'm David Mills. Currently I'm working for Panthera, working on an Arabian leopard project in Saudi Arabia. But before this, I was based almost completely in Africa and worked in Uganda, Botswana, South Africa, and yeah, so lived quite around I've worked with cheetahs, leopards, cheetahs, leopards, lions, golden cats, mainly cats, but also some wild.
Yeah, you've been all over the place. You've done a lot of stuff. The nice thing, so with this webinar, with Wild Insights, I mean, the name kind of gives it away, but the idea is to talk to people of all different kinds of backgrounds who have worked in conservation or with wildlife or researched wildlife, to give the people who follow Bushwise and follow GVI a bit of a look into what it's like to work in this industry, in related industries, and how you end up getting to that point. Because a lot of people who we connect with are young people in their 20s or even earlier, high school graduates who are wondering, how can I start my life in conservation? I love nature, I love wildlife. I get a lot of people who grew up watching National Geographic, and David Attenborough comes up all the time. So you get that passion, but how do you turn that passion into a career? So I think I have a number of questions I want to walk through with you, but if we get off track, we get off track. It's the best way to have one of these. Okay. So I think just to start, when you were young, what sort of inspired you and got you interested? Did you feel it as a kid?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I always liked nature documentaries. Until I was 10, I lived in Michigan. And yeah, I loved animals. My favorite stuffed animals were a little stuffed tiger and a snow leopard. Apparently I lost one of them once and was inconsolable and had to go buy a new one. So cats were there from when I was 2 years old, apparently. And then when I was 12, we moved to West Africa, and then I got exposed to more wildlife, such as is left there. There wasn't much in the area where we were living, but there still are. There are still some things there. So yeah, I've always liked the forest and the bush and been fascinated with wildlife, yeah, since I was very young.
Wow, that's really cool. I mean, 2 years old. Have you've seen snow leopards in real life in the wild, or?
No, I haven't actually. No, I spent all my time in Africa.
Yeah, there aren't that many snow leopards there. Yeah.
In captivity, sorry. They're very cute.
Yeah. And the carnivore passion started when you were 2, but when did you first get an opportunity to, do research or study animals?
So I actually volunteered with the Cheetah Conservation Fund at the time, but it was the Kenya branch, and they've now become Action for Cheetahs in Kenya. So I think I was one of Mary Wykstra's first volunteers in Kenya back in 2002. And I was just looking for a way to come back to Africa, and that was before the internet that we had today. So I found out through my my grandmother was in hospital with leukemia, and her nurse's aunt is Mary Wykstra, who was working in Kenya. So that's how I found out about that, and I went and volunteered with her for 3 months, and came back and did a little bit more volunteering with in Pinda with the Leopard project there, and then Cheetah Conservation Botswana, and then I got a position as a coordinator with the Leopard project in Botswana.
Did you study in undergrad anything in particular that helped?
Just general biology. Yeah, I mean, these days, obviously, wildlife management or ecology, something that gives you a little bit more detail would be helpful. But yeah, I didn't. I just studied basic biology.
Okay. Yeah. I always find doing sciences is obviously a very good way to start if you're interested in conservation. Having not studied science, it makes it a lot harder. But the volunteering thing is really interesting because I think a lot of people now get involved in volunteering. There are a lot of ways to go about it. It does get challenging though, because the opportunities might be fewer and further between, depending on what you're interested in.
Yeah, and you got to be careful because a lot of the volunteer opportunities are money-making schemes. And of course, like I did pay to go work on the Cheetah project in Kenya, but it was like $1,000 a month or something like that. It wasn't the exorbitant rates that you pay now. But that money was used to make materials for school kids. So, fine. You have to look at what's being done with the money, and if it's being run as a volunteer mill, where you're not really going to get the experience that you're looking for. Because if you're in a group of 20 volunteers that are all like digging ditches or something, you're not networking in the way you need to. You're not understanding, if you're going to volunteer or work for free, you want to start to understand the dynamics of whatever field you're in, if it's human wildlife conflict or tracking wildlife or whatever.
Yeah.
And what are the nuances of that, and then where are your skill gaps and where do you need to expand, and then also to do some networking so you get to know some people because they can recommend you. That's how I got the Leopard position in Botswana, because I volunteered with the Cheetah project and we got along really well, and I was obviously very keen and not bad at what I did. So the director of that project talked to the director of the other one and said, hey, I know you're looking for somebody to take him. And so there's so many volunteer opportunities now that you won't get all of the end of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so our sister organization GVI does a lot of volunteer work, and people also do apprenticeships and internships in conservation, and the focus is really on, like you say, like on skills development, on real authentic experiences, on working with partners on the ground, on like actual real work that is making an impact, as opposed to, like you say. But anyway, we don't have to get too far into that. But
it's an important first step. Like it's an entry point, and yes, there are conservation careers, and they do internship programs. They were talking about something in Africa too, and Tropical Biology Association. There's lots of ways that you can actually. You have to pay a little bit more for that, I think, but there's lots of ways that you can. They're all paid volunteers because, let me tell you, having managed volunteers, they are difficult, and you basically have to have someone who just manages them. You get a few who are really good and they pick up stuff really well, they collect data really well, they learn quick. You get a lot of people who are just there to faff around and serious about what they're doing, and those people can be a lot of work. They just wanted to go see cheetahs, and they can be a headache. So that's why you're giving your time, but they also have to pay someone to look after you and make sure you don't die. And so it's none of them are free. You just have to look at how many they're taking on at once. That's a good indicator. What are the skills, like the internships and stuff? What do they actually looking to do. I think WCN also has one specifically for people in Africa. But anyway.
Nice. So you gained a whole bunch of skills, and then you managed to get a real role. And that was the field coordinator on leopard ecology. So the next question I was going to ask was how you got that, but I mean, you jumped into that a little bit. Can you talk about what you did in that role? Like, what was that? What was entailed in that?
So, I mean, first of all, she was the project founder was there 6 months a year, so 3 months on, 3 months off, and she needed somebody there. I mean, she didn't need somebody. She was thinking she might need somebody, and so when I started, it was kind of like, well, I don't know if I want to deal with this, but okay, my friend says he's good, so let's try it. And I worked for food and lodging. Like, I didn't get paid for the first 3 years, and we had some funding, like cash flow issues, but everything, I had no expenses, so that was fine. And then we got a bit more funding, and I started getting paid. So my role was basically to make sure that all the data was collected properly. So, excuse me, we were tracking leopards and lions. We were doing spore counts. Sorry, I got apparently very dry today as well.
Yeah.
So we were doing spore counts on different roads through the park.
Spore counts being
you drive along very slowly and count how many tracks of lions and leopards you can. It is not a widely supported method now, except for understanding where lions are or leopards or whatever, but we used to try and use it to count them, which is a little bit dodgy now. But anyway, that's why we were doing it. We wanted to know how many there were and where they were. And so then we would also drive around to do game counts. And so we did this, we did each transect like once or twice a month. And so that was my main job. Sorry. And then the beginning, we weren't doing any human wildlife conflict stuff, but we started as we went along. And so then we were going to investigate things that were killed by predators, and eventually we started working with farmers to build better enclosures, and then obviously managing the camp, making sure that there's all the supplies there you need. If something breaks, either fix it or find somebody to fix it, because we were 3 hours from the city. So I'm sorry, I don't know what's attacking my throat.
Yeah. Has a cat got your tongue, David?
It's probably cat, yeah, probably cat hair on my clothes. But anyway.
Oh God.
So camp management, managing all of the staff, so all of our trackers and cleaning people, and making sure they all got paid, and dealing with disputes and all of that kind of stuff, and camp maintenance, data collection, some human wildlife conflict stuff. And then occasionally we would, change collars on some of the lions or something like that. But we usually had researchers in the camp who are actually following that. But I was trying to catch leopards, because leopards in that area they range over 700 to 1,000 square kilometers based on the collars that we had. And so the chances that they're going to walk past your trap are very small. And so I spent a lot of time trying to figure out where they were going to be, and trying to put a cage in the right place so that we
that's a huge range. Was the leopard density high, low? I mean, can you explain how that's unusual, maybe in context?
Yeah, there's not very much overlap. So I think the reason there is because the main prey is not evenly distributed. So you can have, like in the Karoo, the leopards there, I think 180 to 250 square kilometers or something like that, around 200 square kilometers for a home range. But there's hyraxes and bikers and things around. In the central Kalahari, there are salt pans that collect water, and there are pumped water points that are sometimes 2, sometimes 15, sometimes 20 or more kilometers apart. And so the animals tend to cluster around. So basically, in that landscape, the leopard, a male leopard would hold a territory that overlapped with several of those large pans where it had all the best prey. And then a few females would also overlap with some of them. And so the prey density, there wasn't a lot of overlap. There was obviously some, because those are large territories and they're home ranges at that point. They're hard to defend. So but it wasn't like they were just nomadic and completely overlapping. There was a dominant male in a specific area, and he defended that area. So I think I forget what the density was, but it was, I actually don't remember. But that's like a quarter of the density you would expect in other places. Kruger will be much, 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 much higher.
Yeah, and the lion density also much thinner.
Lion density, we knew more. We had 50 lions at one point in it's 250 plus a little bit of Central Kalahari, so maybe 3,000 square kilometers, about 50 lions, and that crashed at one point because there was some disease and a drought and all this stuff. It went down to about 25. So the lion density was also quite low, and they also did that thing where they sort of stayed within a few kilometers of the pans, and they went and hunted and drank and would travel between them, but they're not just camping out 15 k's from food. So we had lions during the drought, after the drought, that were, the male lion was 1,500 square kilometers. I think a female lion wandered over 3,000. They just their prides completely fissioned. Before the drought, I think it was like also about 1,000 square kilometers, so basically covering the same pans. And yeah, when the drought, and then the lions, there was someone studying them at that point. She said the two prides she was studying only came within, their territories overlapped a tiny bit, but they only came within 12 k's of each other. And then once the drought came, everyone just basically cluster bombed. They went everywhere. Like the ones from one pride were in another pride's area. They were all wandering by themselves and in pairs, and yeah, it was an interesting dynamic. Yeah, I don't know. They have some lions collared now. I'm not sure what the situation is, but I think it's been more stable.
I remember reading other research on the lions in the Kalahari. I can't remember when it was from, but talking about how the pride dynamics are so different from things you would see in a place like Kruger, and the way that prides interact with it's just a completely unique.
Southern Kruger, yeah. It's very fission fusion, and so we had one pride but it was 5 lionesses, and they would come together. They would travel in 2 pair in a group of 3. They come together, and there was one floater there was basically 2 pairs and one floater. When they would come together, she'd go to the other one, and then they'd wander around for a while and come back together. And so but that fission fusion is pretty common. It happens in Kruger, happens in the north a lot where it's drier. It's not as efficient to hunt in a large pride if the prey density is low, because your potential reward isn't enough to feed everybody. So
yeah. And that research or the research you're referring to in Northern Kruger would have been when you were at the EWT, right? With the Endangered Wildlife Trust. We can come to that just now. I do want to ask about that, but I wanted to just sort of shift a bit, because you went on to do some work in marine surveys for a little while. Is that right?
I did. While I was doing my PhD, I did that for money.
Okay. I saw that popping up, and I was curious. Do you want to talk about that at all, or is that like a part of your life where you're just like, nah?
Yeah, it's fine. There's actually a documentary that premiered. I'm going to a documentary premiere tomorrow that's about that topic, and they interviewed me for that. It's it's about the Wild Coast.
Okay.
The whole phase there, and how sort of contentious that whole thing is. So while I was doing my PhD, a friend of mine had been doing these jobs on boats, which was a marine mammal observer job. So basically the when oil companies were doing seismic surveys, which means they're towing an array of air guns that they fire at the ocean floor. And then behind that, they tow hydrophones that record the reflection off the ocean floor. And that way they can map what the ocean floor looks like, and they can look for faults, and they can look for pockets that look like they might have oil and gas. And so at some point, probably 20 years ago now, somebody said, hey, when you hit the man overboard button, the air guns turn off. Why? And they said, well, because the pressure could do internal damage to somebody who's fallen overboard. And the marine mammal people said, there's other animals in the ocean too.
Not just blue.
So
yeah.
It was a time when oil was booming, or the oil price was high rather, and so they said, okay, fine, we'll pay people to stand on the deck and watch for whales, and if they come closer than whatever we set, which is usually 500 meters or a kilometer, they come within that distance of the air guns, we'll turn them off, we'll wait till they're gone, and then start again. And so basically you just watch for whatever they list: whales, dolphins. We've done turtles and whale sharks and manta rays, and it depends on where you are, what the priority species are. And if they go into the mitigation zone, they have to turn the air guns off, and they have to wait until they're out, and then they have to ramp the guns up over 20 minutes to make sure the sound starts quiet, to give things time to go away, and you get paid to do that. So and also the other side of that is to listen to hydrophones at night, where you just hear the prop wash and the air guns going off all night, and maybe a humpback or a dolphin.
Okay.
But they paid well. I mean, it was at that point paying about $300 a day.
Okay.
Yeah. That's how I made some extra money while I was in the rainforest.
Wow. Yeah, that is. I mean, it's definitely a left turn in your experience. But I mean, obviously, still connected to conservation and wildlife, just a very different world. I mean, do you have sea legs? Is it a place you feel comfortable, or?
Yeah, I actually like it. I miss it sometimes.
Yeah.
Nice. I mean, to go from the completely open ocean, where you can see to the horizon and there's no land, and you never know what's going to float by. You see some cool stuff, to the rainforest where it's all very closed. You still don't know what you're going to see, but it's a very different, Western Uganda's mountains and forest. And so switching between that is, I think, interesting for my brain. Actually, the guy I just sent you the podcast about Ronan is actually the one who.
Okay. So just maybe for a couple of pieces of media for people who want to watch or listen to something else, the name of the podcast, and then also the documentary you're talking about.
Oh, sure.
Am I putting you on the spot?
Yeah, this friend of mine who I met in Uganda, and he's now a famous Nat Geo photographer and filmmaker, did an interview for the Wolf podcast. It is episode 149 of the Wolf Connection. It's an hour and a half, but I actually listened to the whole thing. He's quite engaging.
Okay.
When I saw the length, I was like, God, can I listen to you talk for that long? But I mean, he's a good storyteller. He had to learn how to tell a story, and he's learned it very well.
Nice.
Be interesting. So, yeah, on the film, it's only being released in South Africa, I think. It's just finished. I don't know where they're going to try and get it.
Because this was about the seismic surveys that Shell was doing off the Wild Coast, right?
It's called Wild Coast Warriors.
Okay.
Turning the Tide on Oil Giants. And they interviewed me because the producer, Nick Chevalier, was going to Uganda, and he wanted to talk about golden cats. So we met here in Hoodspite and had a chat. And as we were chatting, he said, said, what else are you working on? He said, oh, I'm doing this film about seismic surveys. I was like, oh, I used to do that too. And he's like, oh, okay. And then we chatted about it. And I tend to have a very not moderate. I can be quite opinionated, but
Yeah.
I have a more, as you know, um, I have I try to have a more balanced view, a more realistic view, rather than saying, all oil awful and evil, or we drive cars, we need oil. There's something in the middle where you can be responsible and sort of support things that are moving towards change without being sort of a complete fanatic about it on either side. So I'll see. I don't know what part of the interview he actually used. Might make me
Nice.
look like an extremist. You never know.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point too, because and we'll move into big cats again now, because I'm sure a lot of people are here to hear more about golden cats, but conservation can be very controversial. And if you're not
Yep.
willing to deal with controversy, then you might not be entering the right field, because there's a lot of stuff that comes out of it.
If you go in guns blazing, you're just starting a war. You're not going to actually make any progress. I mean, human wildlife conflict is a big, and whether it's commercial farmers in the US or South Africa, or small subsistence farmers, they're still passionate about not losing their stuff. So if you go in as a sort of Greenpeace level fanatic, or I don't know, I've worked with some people from Greenpeace, they seem to be quite passionate. It was on the boats, there was some of the bridge crew used to get gets boring, right? And so their entertainment was basically winding up the marine mammal observers that used to work for Greenpeace, because they could say, oh, we're gonna, when I get back, oh no, my country in Norway, we just did our minke whale hunt, that's, and like go on about how good minke whales taste. And you tell me that, I'm like, okay, how old is it? How old is the tradition? Like, how many are hunted? Are there regulations? Like, I want to know information. The other MMOs would just lose their minds. Like, it's just so traumatizing to them. You can get the same dynamic in conservation with elephants, with lions, with any charismatic animal that people want to save. It's very easy to get too far into, I have to protect this at all costs, and everyone who is killing them is evil, rather than stepping back and trying to understand. That's actually one of the most important things. Understand first, then make your argument.
That's a huge point, definitely. I have other questions I want to come back to on human wildlife conflict, but I want to get into golden cats, because I think that's just I'm gonna, for those who wouldn't have seen before, I'm just gonna share the picture that, one of the pictures that you shared with me, of the golden cat. So maybe, and I believe I've got two different colorations here.
There's two colors.
Yeah. And there's even, isn't there a third as well?
They are sometimes melanistic. There is, in some places, some cats, and these are camera trap pictures, so it's hard to say, but there are some cats that look like they are in between, like they have patches of red, but they're mainly gray, or they look almost tan or chocolate color, but it's not one of the main. So in Uganda, in Kibale, where I was, I identified them to individual, which you can see how many spots there are on there. That was quite difficult. That's not enough spots to be identifying. And it's not like identifying a leopard where it's really obvious. It is about 50% red and 50% gray.
Okay. So tell us what you were doing.
So I was living in the desert, and I was tired of the desert. So I wrote, Luke Hunter who was the president of Panthera at the time, and I had volunteered on his project in Pinda a long time ago, and said, hey, I want to go back to the forest, or I need to change anyway. Black-footed cats are only really studied in South Africa, so we could do that in Botswana, or golden cats, and I could go back to the forest. And he was like, okay, he was really interested in golden cats. So he said, I'll find the place for you. If you're happy to do it, he said, if I'm involved, we can get somebody from Panthera. So we did. And there were two of us. I was originally going to go to Gabon, but then the other person who was studying them, Lila Bahaldin, so we're I think the only two people to get degrees on them still. She ended up going to Gabon and I went to Uganda. And so we studied with the same supervisors in two different parts of the range and using mainly camera traps. I tried to catch them, but the ones in Kivale would not take bait. They wouldn't come to. I don't know if they scavenge elsewhere, but they don't scavenge in Kivale. You know, sometimes leopards do that too, where they've been poisoned. They don't mess with anything that humans have touched. So could be that situation. But yeah, that's why I have so many camera trap pictures, because I was basically running camera traps for 4 years.
Did none of them, you were never able to catch one?
No, I didn't catch any.
Wow.
And nobody still has collared one. We're still talking about it. We need to get a collar on one. But you got to find the right place and the right people to do it.
Wow. Okay, so what did you learn about them in your research?
Well, we didn't know anything. I mean, so after I started, I found out that there had been a guy there who was going to do his PhD, and he tried for a few months and then quit. And there'd been a few people who started and quit. And it was basically the species that nobody could get any data on. Obviously, that's the one. And so basically we didn't know. We knew that they were forest dependent, meaning you don't really find them outside of rainforest. They're very closely related to caracals. There's not a lot of places where caracals and golden cats overlap. We found a few now that need more investigation, but it's normally they're quite separate in their habitat. So we did know that, but we didn't know what they eat, really. There was one study, and anything about them, densities. So that's why we put the cameras out. We wanted to find out how many there were. I was looking at them in relationship to the other carnivores, because there's no leopards in Kibale. In Lila's study site, there were leopards. So she looked at how different levels of logging or hunting impacted golden cat presence. I looked at a little bit of different area use research or hunting areas, tourism, completely converted farmland and stuff, and how that impacts. But most of it, because I started studying them and realized they're actually everywhere in this forest. And the better questions had to do with the whole community of carnivores. So I quickly expanded my study to golden cats and all of the other small carnivores. So 2 species of genets, African palm civets, a few species of mongoose, just to.
Yeah, there are some amazing photos that you captured of so many different species.
I did put colors on them.
Okay.
Those are very cool. Palm civet.
And how long was your study over?
I was actually there for 4 years. This is partly because I was working at the same time, partly because I just liked living there. I wasn't being very serious about finishing my PhD is the problem. So I was trying to do my write-up there, which didn't work. I had to come to South Africa and get stuff done.
I mean, people dream of seeing these kinds of things pop up on their camera traps. It's pretty amazing to see all of the things you caught. You mentioned what they eat. I'm gonna see if this video will work quickly, because I saw this was on. Go away. Let's see. I don't know if the audio will
Sam
work,
but... who manages the Ngogoro chimpanzee project off this video. He put the camera out to monitor chimps that were eating the insects from this, or termites from the bark.
And what kind of monkeys are these?
Red colobus.
And this cat, you just don't expect the cat to be as small as it is.
Yeah, they are quite small.
You'll see this in the slow motion one
Those
where it
monkeys
comes
are
out.
quite big, though.
Yeah. It was a bold move for it to try that. I mean, I assume its prey is much smaller normally.
Yeah, and I don't know why he went for that one. Like surely there was some smaller versions that
And he
easier to
changed his
get.
mind too.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, I would be totally remiss not to show this, right? Because this was such an interesting. Before I share the video, do you want to explain what the context of this video is?
So most of the time, we don't advocate using bait with camera traps because it changes behaviors of different species and different species in different ways and stuff like that. So it's not a first choice, but I wanted to study the carnivore community, and palm civets are arboreal. And so if I wanted to be able to count them, I needed them to come down. And so I used like small sweet banana, few little pieces of meat, and then Calvin Klein Obsession for Men. I sprayed it onto usually a rotten sort of termite infested log that was sort of hollow, and everything stops. I mean, a lot of things stop for the food, but everything stops for a Calvin Klein. So this is what she's actually stopping. So it's supposed to be a synthetic mix of civetone, which is what African civets mark with, and there are African civets there in the forest, and a lot of things overmark them, and vanilla, and so yeah, I mean, elephants like it a lot as well. I would really not wear perfume in the forest if I
The
were.
biggest lesson people can take from this webinar
Yeah,
is don't wear Calvin Klein Obsession for Men in
yeah.
particular, perhaps, but
The best thing you'll get is peed on by a golden cat. Like, much worse things could happen, trust me.
yeah, why are they called golden cats? This might be a silly question, but because they're not golden, and I mean, they're not really golden.
Well, at first, I think they thought that they were two different species, or might be two different species, or two different like phases of life, or so, so golden ones were the first ones that were found. I guess it's just that's what they ended up calling them.
Okay, it's fine.
Back in the
So
like,
the
it was a long time ago that they weren't very creative back then.
It's funny how I mean, working for Panthera, you would definitely know this because I see Panthera posting about this all the time, and obviously they focus on cats. But there are so many wild cat species that people have never heard of before.
Oh yeah. And there's always more. When I was doing my PhD, I think there were 34, like in 2010, and now there's 40. So
Wow.
keep finding new. It's basically subspecies that keep getting their own species status. But yeah, there's a lot.
When you were doing this research and you started to obviously like add on these smaller carnivores, was there a moment when you were doing this research that you saw something that just completely blew your mind? I mean, the Calvin Klein thing aside.
I mean, research data wise, I don't think we had any major surprises, but look, the things you get on camera traps, yes. I mean, you get pictures of, crowned eagles taking baby monkeys away, or a golden cat carrying a monkey. Golden cats have a red golden cat with a gray baby. And yeah, so that was quite cool. So some of that stuff, and then walking in the forest, you always see stuff. I really miss that actually. Like I found like this neon green slime mold at one point, and this navy blue mossy stuff, and different insects that you've never seen before. I found a little chameleon Boulanger's pygmy chameleon that as you should not do, but I did. I brought it back to the research station and showed the field director. He was like, "Oh, I didn't even know we had these here." And I went and put him back where I found him. But anyway,
Nice.
just that sort of discovery where you see stuff that nobody has seen is it makes it more exciting. Makes you want to get out of bed and yeah, let's
Yeah. I mean, and I remember seeing this photo and just thinking, like, I think in your caption you even say you need to look closely, you might miss it. But
yeah,
there's the kitten. Look at this thing. I mean, that's so cool.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like such a what's is there tourism? Is there a lot of tourism there? Is it, I mean, because you don't really hear about it.
Well, no, yes. I mean no, yes. There is tourism, but it's focused on chimps and gorillas. So where there's chimps and gorillas, there's golden cats too, because it's the same habitat. So, but you can't see golden cats. It's nearly impossible to see them. So, I mean, I saw, I think, the tail end of one, I think. And even people who have been in the forest going out before dawn, coming back after dusk, monitoring the chimps and things like that, they've seen them a handful of times in 20 years, like 2 or 3 times. They're just very, 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 very sneaky.
And do you think that reflects anything? I mean, we were speaking about human wildlife conflict before. Do you think that they have like learned to avoid humans because of interactions, or do you think they're just inherently kind of elusive species?
I think they are inherently elusive. In that forest, the leopards had been extirpated in the 70s. There could be some sort of, I don't know, golden cat culture of being sneaky. But the thing is, this is true of all forests ever. There's no forest you go where you're going to see golden cats. Lila saw one walking down the road one. And she also did like 4 surveys or something. So it's just how they are. So I've also heard that caracals are similar in a wooded area. You don't see them very often because they're naturally skittish and they sort of just step off the road. And golden cats, I think, are even more shy. They just aren't going to walk down. Like sometimes you'll see in Pawnee Woodland, you'll see a caracal walk the road. You just don't see that. As rare as it is for just get a proper sighting of a caracal, it's just almost unheard of, and a complete fluke that one happens to step out because they didn't hear you coming. Otherwise, they lay down in the grass or behind a bush or behind a tree, wait for you to go, and you never knew they were there. I'm sure I walked past thousands of them.
Yeah, I know that feeling from leopards, just having lived in Hoodspruit and being in the wildlife estates. You see the tracks of them everywhere,
Yeah.
but you don't ever see them. And I mean, we knew we had at least like one mother with 3 cubs that was nearby, and that there were a couple of decently sized males because you could see the tracks. But yeah, and it's not a big estate, it's like a 500-hectare space. And no matter how many times I ran every single trail, I never saw a single leopard, but I just knew they were just nearby.
They're hiding behind a bush with their tail, like,
Yeah,
as
exactly.
you walk past, making
Yeah.
little twitters.
Yeah. Okay, so I mean, we're both very aware that conservation isn't all just roses and saving animals and everything. So the human wildlife conflict that you mentioned before, how did you see that playing out during this research in particular?
So golden cats aren't really a major conflict species. There were some, I say that because, I've dealt with leopards and lions as conflict species, and they can be very challenging. And elephants and baboons and bush pigs in Uganda they do a lot of damage. Golden cats, you hear about sometimes they take a goat or something like that. So they will, but they don't leave the forest. So I put cameras in and outside the forest and on the boundary. I got them on the boundary, which is usually a hard boundary. It's like massive rainforest tree that's 30 meters tall, tea plantation, like literally right next to each other. And so, but even there's a few like smaller forested valleys coming out of the forest. They didn't go into those areas. So it was, I think, more, so all the goats that were eaten were literally within 50 meters of the forest, just tied to a tree. And the cat could see it right there and just went out. One of them was like literally at the edge of the forest. So I didn't deal with too much conflict. I talked to a lot of people about elephant conflict because they would come out of the forest at night and raid people's crops, and people were advocating different things. And some people were saying you should dig trenches, and other people were saying you should, use chili. Other people were saying you have to plant tea, because if you plant tea in the right way, that they don't want to walk through it. And other people were saying beehives work. And I said, guys, why don't you just do all of those things? Like, why do you have to pick the best one?
Yeah, great point.
Like, this is one of the, when you talk about conflicts and competition and stuff in conservation, people often want a silver bullet. And they want to prove that their silver bullet is the best one. And that's why people should give them more money. And maybe that's true, but my philosophy is always, I don't just eat healthy. Let's not talk about my dinner last night. I don't just exercise. I don't do one thing for my health and that's going to just keep me healthy. You got to do all the stuff. And so, whether you're protecting from lions or elephants or whatever, you have to do everything that you can reasonably do to protect yourself. You can't just like pick one thing and hope it's going to work. We do that in our houses too. You don't just lock the door and forget about the windows. You turn the alarm off. You make sure you don't have stuff outside that's going to, like, you do a lot of stuff to make sure your things are safe. So I don't understand why people want to just find the one thing. You build this enclosure this way, you dig a trench, and you're sorted. It's not how life works. So I had lots of conversations in Uganda about that, regarding the elephants specifically.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good lesson to pass on, I think, for young conservationists, because like, exactly, I mean, you hear the term like conservation solutions and that kind of thing a lot, which sounds like it's like the answer to the math problem.
No.
And that's not how it actually works. And just like we said, like certain lions acting differently from others, different animals, like they don't read the books, they don't do what you expect them to do every single time. The wild dog digs under the fence.
Yeah. And this elephant might like chili, maybe that one doesn't like honey. Like, there's certainly regions where chili doesn't work or bees don't work. But it's also, I mean, animals have individual personalities just like people and individual preferences. So think about chili. Like, some people love it, some people hate it. So it's, one solution isn't going to target all of the individuals within a species.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually have a question, which is, what is your favorite cat species, David, and why?
I mean, leopards. No, I like how, so leopards are a bit of a paradox, and seem to like those in my life. They're obviously, they can be dangerous. They can be quite ferocious. They're also beautiful. When you see them, they move very smoothly and softly. And I like that soft power that they have. It's not just because of the spots. I mean, the spots are, like, if you watch a lion walk, lions plod, like they're big and they're heavy and they're, brutes. And a leopard is more like a ninja. They step lightly, they move smoothly. They can be very ungraceful sometimes, which is funny, but overall, that's what attracts me to them. Also
Nice.
what we were talking about. Like they can be there, and if they want you to see them, you will. If you don't, you won't.
Mhm. Yeah, I think I probably agree with you as far as cats go. I mean, everyone wants to see lions for some reason, but oftentimes if you see lions, you're seeing them laying down and doing very little.
Mhm.
And unless the leopard's in the tree having a nap, usually it's on the move and you get some really interesting activity. Or I mean, just seeing the animal move itself is so amazing, you know.
And even if it is having a nap in a tree, like they're still like completely relaxed and completely, or they seem, like I haven't interviewed one, but they seem completely relaxed and completely alert at the same time,
Okay.
which I'm a little bit envious
I'm making a note, David has not interviewed a leopard.
of.
Good to know. Okay, so we're getting close to the end of the time we have, which is crazy because like 55 minutes has just gone by so quickly. But you know, we actually didn't even necessarily get into everything that you do. But when you look back, maybe one last point, when you look back on what you've managed to accomplish and what you've done, and I know you're pretty humble, so you probably will say, I haven't accomplished enough yet. But what's the thing that you are the most proud of so far in your career?
Oh wow. Oh, putting me on the spot now.
Yep.
That
I didn't give you any of
is
these interview questions ahead of time.
Look, I mean, doing a PhD on, even though it took me a long time, but doing a PhD on a species that other people had actually bailed on because it was too difficult, that is an accomplishment. I mean, PhDs are stressful enough as it is. Um, I am glad I did that on a species that was not just like your normal everyday animal like a lion. Although I do like it. But yeah, other than that, I don't know. What I feel best about is when I'm learning new things and new perspectives. So, looking back, the things I value most are when I met someone or had a conversation that completely changed how I see things. And it's all of these things we're talking about, like what is human wildlife conflict? What's going on? How do you understand it? Like someone who like slapped me out of my idealism and made me see things in a more realistic and productive way that lets me be more effective now.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good thing to keep in mind too for people who are on this who are interested in conservation. Like the really cool thing about conservation or like working around wildlife or I mean doing like a Bushwise course and becoming a field guide is that like we said, animals always surprise us. They're always doing something different. People who work in conservation are always trying new things. It's a career that you're just always going to be learning and adapting and getting new experiences in. It never gets boring, really. Nice,
Yeah,
David. Well, I mean, it can get boring, I suppose, depends on the job you end up doing. But
I was
if you
going to
look in the
say
right
it can,
places,
but you have to be proactive about it, and you have to identify when you are starting to lose, when you're starting to get burned out, because you can get burned out even in something that you loved going into it. Like it's very disorienting to realize that you can be doing something that you always dreamed of doing, and yet you're miserable. And it's just because you stopped learning. It's you stopped getting new experiences, you stopped developing. You have to be aware of that in your career and know when it's time to move on, rather than just clinging to this thing you worked so long to get. There's a lot more experiences out there, and someone else will enjoy what you're doing. So be open to growth.
nice, David. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I think we had a couple more questions pop through, but what I'll do is, if we have anything, we'll write back to the individuals who've asked us questions. And I just want to say thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. That was fun.